The year is 3025. The world is now a technological wasteland. Millions of human jobs have been lost. Armed robots march the city ruins with machine guns. Catgirl waifus now finally within reach.
Things are rather grim, if you ask me.
But at least I was able to transfer my consciousness into this computer. Also, me and cryptocurrencies never really took off, if you're wondering. So, AI is inevitable at this point. We're getting closer to a takeover each day, or at least that's what I'm being led to believe. It wasn't too long ago that I talked about how more companies were integrating artificial intelligence into their products, as well the backlash that's often followed by doubling down on it. We know it's ultimately here to stay, because companies like Fiverr and Coca-Cola seem to be going in on it, at least without taking into account all the backlash. Though you have to wonder sometimes if the hype behind it is really worth the investment. Yes, in theory, it should get better when it comes to learning the ways of human beings, right? We've seen some rather significant improvements with the way it handles data, even somewhat solving the multiple finger issue that usually gives it away. But putting that aside, if you take a closer look at it, something still just doesn't seem right. Because while the detail is impressive for what it is, there's a severe lack of soul behind it, an integral ingredient to what makes each art piece what it is, the spice if you will. And that's something that doesn't just apply to art. This is a prevalent problem for the majority of things that are currently manufactured by AI. As you saw earlier just now, you've even got video footage being produced by the damn thing, which, yeah, we haven't really gone any closer to that being viable, not that you want it to be anyways, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's AIs that can do voices, music, homework, coding for games, you name it. There's an AI company specialized in automating hours to years of work. It's the unique effort and struggle that makes many of these things that we enjoy all the more sweeter, like a nicely cooked, homemade meal that mama made you. That's how I tend to see it. But whenever AI tries to go about making that same meal, well, it looks about the same, and it was probably made the same way even, but it doesn't taste the same. It's a dull, tasteless slop that lacks what made it so great in the first place. And because it can be made perfect on demand, much like the replicator from Star Trek, the luster of that home-cooked meal is lost in translation. It may be a carbon copy of the original, but it'll never be original down to its molecular structure, the atoms to which make the item whole. In layman's terms, actually worth a shit. Rightfully, people have turned against it, not just because it lacks any originality or human ingenuity, but because at the end of the day, it's an interpretation of what was made from hours upon hours of training on scrapped data. Oftentimes, that data is stolen from people without their consent in order to create the things you see. This has had disastrous consequences for many artists who strive from doing commissions, who now have to use these extremely ugly DeviantArt-like watermarks in order to combat it. Which is unfortunate because a while back, I remember when tracing or art straight up being stolen were the main issues. Now that's nothing compared to what's happening to artists these days. Years of work just scrapped and learned to make this mass-produced AI slop that I cannot imagine anyone enjoys unironically. That same virtue holds true for anything slapped together by AI in general, as bits and pieces of data that are essentially Frankenstein together what's desired from a prompt, which is all stored in this massive database that can be pulled from at any time to process each request individually. But it ain't cheap as you'd imagine. All this data has to be stored somewhere obviously, and to be able to hold petabytes of storage. This also means it is a huge resource drain, as of many things on the internet these days. So the energy consumed to make it all work isn't exactly good for the environment, to put it simply. So in order to keep these AI services profitable as a whole to offset the downside, these companies behind them typically ask you to pay them for a subscription to use their services. You might be allotted a currency system or a couple shots for free sometimes, but you usually have to pay for it if you want to experiment with it, because you don't really get what you want the first time around, thus requiring several generations to reach that desired result. This has gotten better over time, but extremely inconsistent even still. As more of them begin to pop up or become more viable, it isn't a huge surprise all these mainstream companies want to utilize AI for the sake of automating aspects of their business. But on the other hand, despite all the terrible things that come out of it, it has improved our lives in ways that we don't even realize, that we can take advantage of, now thanks to years of data that has simplified the ways that we use the internet. Whether it be searching for things or automating tasks that would normally be cumbersome, there are some benefits to utilizing it that could very well make a difference in a manner that isn't going to bring harm more than it does improve the quality of life for us, in ways that couldn't have been comprehended 20 or so years ago prior. And that's just how I see AI as a whole, honestly. A useful tool at best, and maybe even a job killer at worst. But which is it exactly? It surely can't be more than just an excuse to be lazy. What most people don't realize is that AI can't really be quantified into a singular label, and usually that's what many people default to, especially whenever their livelihoods are potentially endangered due to these bad actors. A threat that has to be extinguished to prevent themselves from being put out of a job. It's understandable to be afraid of a technology like this developing so rapidly. I certainly wouldn't want to lose any work opportunities all because it could be automated for pennies by a company. But it's important that we consider the facts about AI and draw our own conclusions from it before condemning it all entirely. So I did a little bit of investigating to really look deep into what artificial intelligence has to offer these days. And to answer the important question of this video, is AI overhated or pure evil? It goes without saying, I'm not here to try to change anyone's mind or their feelings about AI. It is completely valid to feel the way that you do about it, whether it be abject hatred or undying support for the future of its development. I simply just want to put into perspective what it all entails in terms of its features, along with the negative implications, as well as its positive in terms of what it has to offer to our world. I think it's worth talking about, because what both sides seem to forget is that you can both be wrong in your own ways. So, this is my way of branching the conversation to essentially allow for us to take another look into what artificial intelligence is truly all about. I want to classify all these AI programs by two of these following categories: helpful AI and harmful AI. What exactly do I mean by this? Well, helpful AI would be things that make our lives easier, that don't really infringe upon anything in particular, but is trained on data that simplifies or helps in a manner that would benefit our world greatly. Harmful AI would be something that scrapes upon existing data from the internet without any permission, using that data to create a thing from what it was taught, to which it infringes upon these creators in order to create anything original, whether by replicating or imitating it to some degree to achieve such. I want to give 5 examples for each of these, starting with probably the most contentious of them all, helpful AI. I think it's very easy to hate on AI as a whole, because of all the fear and uncertainty behind it. But when it's put to practical use rather than being taught to replace others, it has potential to do a lot more good in that way. I'm not sure if anyone has really noticed, but if you're a freaking Amazon buyer like I am, you tend to scavenge through the reviews, trying to find out as much as you can about what you want to buy, to make sure you aren't getting scammed into buying a paperweight. I'm a cautious customer, needless to say, so I spend a lot of time sifting through review after review, hoping to make a mindful decision on if I want to buy something or pass on it for anything similar to it. That's just how I am. So when Amazon rolled out an AI that could summarize all those reviews into a concise description, man, does it save way more time than just individually scanning through all of them. It means more time to play Marvel Rivals, or do an extra load of laundry. It's helpful. The thing is, AI summaries recently just caught on, meaning that it wasn't always useful or accurate. Google got caught a while back taking information from Reddit and using those threads to create questionable results. But it saves time when you just want to know the answer to a burning question. And now that a lot of those hiccups have been fixed, I do feel like it's done a lot for getting my choices and figuring out what I want to do 9 times out of 10. Just use your best judgment. Don't follow it blindly all the time. That's the best policy to follow, I think. Now let's say you have an old photo of your grandparents, like super grainy. Can't really make out what's going on in it. Or you're trying to restore an old birthday video on VHS to make it look less crusty, if you will. There's a lot of different ways you could go about fixing them, but the best ways these days is to enhance them with AI. Upscalers have made it more possible than ever to take an existing piece of media and raise the resolution, or fix the imperfections at least. You can drag and drop them into any website that you like, and normally the results are quite impressive for what it's able to accomplish. Now, it won't always come out the way that you want it to. I've often found that older videos upscaled to a higher resolution tend to look like they've been smoothed out, like something spilled Vaseline all over it. So it still has a lot of kinks to iron out before it can be viable. Recently there was a controversy with the theatrical re-release of Daft Punk's anime music video film, Interstellar 5555, where they did essentially the bare minimum and put it through an upscaler without really doing much else. See, if you want to use something like this to raise the resolution artificially, you should at least take the time to ensure things don't look washed out or smeared like in some of these shots. Just comes off as extremely lazy, and a cop-out for anyone who pays to go see it. Like I said, use a tool of care and caution, and make sure you don't delete the original copy. AI, when it first came out, had a bad rap when it came to helping college students write essays or important papers of that nature. It's no secret that eventually professors all across the globe eventually caught wind of it, especially when you take the time to actually read what's turned in. Looks good at first glance, but when you sit down to grade it, well, it kinda just reads like a textbook or a dictionary. There's no actual original human thought put into any of this, like an overly exaggerated version of Mr. Peabody wrote it. Funnily enough, just like how ChatGPT can write your papers for you, there's an AI that can detect plagiarism in those same papers. I don't know whether to be impressed or worried about the future of education itself. But hey, it's a thing. What more can you say? Anything that's considered extremely tedious can now simply be automated without a second thought. If your grammar is absolute dog water, you can just let the AI show you the error of your ways. AHD got you down bad in the Zoom meeting? You can have the audio transcribed or the meeting itself summarized by an AI assistant. Want to build a resume to help you land the job of your dreams? AI can also organize all your experience and other important details into a neat, presentable format if graphic design isn't your passion. You can automate all these tedious tasks just like that. All you really gotta do is look for them. You may have to pay for a subscription at worst, but at best, many of these things appear to be free to use by any and all walks of life. Learning a new language isn't always a cakewalk. Sometimes you just don't have the time or patience to learn it, so usually the next best option is to use a translation tool, which can be hit or miss depending on the language itself. Japanese, for example, is an extremely hard language to translate accurately, especially with its many nuances and overly complicated writing system. So what is a neckbeard otaku supposed to do in these trying times to impress the local Japanese baddies? Saying that out loud made me want to unalive myself. Well, Google Translate is the usual go-to for your average person, but you'd be hard-pressed to be able to get across what you're trying to say at times. That's why something like AI translation is sort of taking life and making something as complicated as Japanese a thing of the past. I'm not going to really try and sit here and explain how something like that works, but I will say that it does a decent enough job for what it is. I haven't really tried to use AI in that manner personally. I haven't been to Japan a few years ago myself, but I know it's also kind of frowned upon because it isn't the ideal way of learning, which I don't think any translation is going to be as good as simply just learning how to read or write the language in general. But hey, if you're just visiting a country for a bit, I don't think it's totally necessary to learn a whole new language for a week-long trip. It'll make things easier, sure, but unless you plan to live there, I don't see too much harm in using an application that utilizes AI for language translation, so it gets a pass from me. This last example is a bit more straightforward. We use it every day without really even knowing it. It's what's led you to find this video after all. It pretty much is the guiding light for how social media tends to operate for the individual user. Algorithms play an important role in finding things that you may want to consume, based on your watch history or your activity on a platform as a whole. So you'll get suggested things based on the data solely, meaning if you were watching a video about traveling, you'd get suggested videos of that nature, for example. It's like I said, straightforward stuff. It isn't like a new thing by any means. I believe even older YouTube had a primitive form of algorithm that led you to finding the videos that you might have liked. But compared to how it was then to what we have now, it seems like a more personalized experience than ever. It can be multiple interests instead of a single interest related to the video, making the possibilities more complex in that sense when it comes to choice for the viewer. It really depends on the website itself, honestly. But a terrible example of an AI algorithm would have to be whatever the fuck Facebook recommends me. I'm not a huge user of that website. I mean, I have it to keep up with friends and family whenever I can, but it isn't usually how I consume my content. So I often get recommended really weird, sometimes disturbing content that makes me wish I didn't log in today. It seems to do the opposite of what an algorithm would normally do, like giving you things that you wouldn't normally want to see on a regular basis. Doesn't really even matter how much of it I filter. It's never a good time on that website. Take my word for it. As you can see, AI has applications beyond just stealing or imitating existing creations. It can indeed serve a purpose beyond attempting to replace anyone, but unfortunately, there's a lot more harm than good when it comes to how AI is implemented. Do I think the fear in all that is completely justified? Should we really be worried about our jobs getting taken away by it? Because it's true, it can do it all much quicker and for way less. But it seems to have a long ways away, and I don't entirely know for sure if it'll remain profitable for long. Just how many AI websites can there possibly be? There's only so much content on the internet. At some point, it'll start copying itself, leading to less than stellar results. Is it really the future? Well, for starters, I wanted to take a quick look into the AI that people are most concerned about. I touched a bit earlier on this, but AI art is a huge issue that I see get brought up a lot, especially within the anime-adjacent communities. It's spread like wildfire. Can't really search for anything without bumping into overly perfect, sterile-looking anime girls that look like they were fresh out of a factory. Don't get me wrong, they're supposed to be perfect, that's why people have waifus, but sometimes it doesn't feel right. Like, there's no light behind their eyes, or they've grown an extra finger. That's usually the giveaway for it being AI generated. The backlash behind it is so bad that that some artists have even caught strays, being accused of using AI themselves in an ironic twist of fate. So not only are we dealing with talentless hacks using prompts to generate these images, but now legitimate artists are negatively affected because their style happens to look like AI, if there not being much evidence to back up the accusation. A witch hunt, if you will. Also, I guess all the insufferable people still use Twitter these days. And these AI-generated waifus need voices, right? That's also on the market for those looking to bring life to their amalgamations. Unfortunately, when it comes to using AI for this, typically it involves literally stealing a voice to make an exact replica. This obviously, much like using the likeness of actors, has received a ton of pushback, especially since companies can use those replicants without having to pay anyone much of anything, if at all. Naturally, voice actors are also in the same line of fire as well, because why would these companies hire you if they can just use a near-perfect version instead? It's gotten to a point where some games are missing voice acting because of agencies attempting to force them to sign a clause, one that would allow such a thing to take place. It's a big concern that doesn't look like it's going to be going away anytime soon, and you just know it is only going to get worse. Another rather unexpected development to come out of AI seems to be music, which is less frowned upon, but an issue nonetheless. Much like writing any prompt, you're essentially describing what the musical composition, the genre, and can even give it lyrics to sing, which can be generated if you'd like. All this is possible with Suno, which seems to be the only AI product that does it well, maybe even too well. I mean, sure, it's an option compared to using royalty-free music, but it's already running into some potential trouble with what it uses to train the AI. I don't think it's really doing as much harm as the previous two I just mentioned, but again, actual musicians are being affected, not just the big ones at that, so it still does harm either way. I mentioned that you could also have Suno's AI generate lyrics for you, especially if you don't really have any idea what your hardcore emo reggae jazz band should sing about. But much like how it needs to scrape data from actual music to bring it to fruition, for the AI to come up with these ideas, typically it has to source things from the internet to give you something. Say for example, you want a good recipe for a handmade pizza tonight. It isn't just going to come up with it from thin air. It is going to take every pizza recipe ever shared on the internet on whichever cooking site there is and put together a suitable enough pizza recipe for you to try. It won't take into account if the ingredients really work together, if the measurements are correct, what temperature you need to cook it for. That's not always possible when you ask something like ChatGPT to carry out that task. So you're in for a rather messy dinner at that. And it blows my mind that anyone wants to use it for anything beyond a fun little novelty. I don't seriously think the best ideas will ever come out of AI, because if that were the case, we'd be getting hit after hit by now, right? But no, it isn't doing that at all. It's just taking whatever it can from the internet to fulfill the prompt. I hope we don't get any movies that use it, but never say never, I suppose. So this last one is hugely detrimental to me as a content creator, because I spend a lot of time trying to put together a lot of this, and it goes without saying, AI can't replicate that human touch. Sure, it can pump things out like a factory, but much like a factory, there's bound to be plenty of defects, and there are many, as you'd imagine. You see it everywhere now, especially on shorts unfortunately, where you can kind of tell it's all automated, rather than thoughtfully crafted. These makeshift content farms tend to take things away from other people, like telling animal tragedy stories with an AI narrator, with the animal feature sometimes not even being the exact one that was put in harm's way. It's the scummy kind of content that sometimes ends up going viral in those places, in a world where anybody can tell a bold-faced lie, if it means getting enough attention for it. Don't get me wrong, I know not everyone is tech savvy, or can afford to pay for products like Adobe, but simplifying what is essentially someone's job and what they've spent years learning just to make it redundant with editing programs like this, it hits pretty close to home for me. So I'm not going to tell you to not use any of these AI products, because I don't even have the right to do that. You can do whatever you want. But at the end of the day, it isn't nearly as fulfilling as learning to do it yourself. Even if you don't think you have the chops, or feel that you may struggle with it, we all have to start from somewhere. When I was first starting out using MMD to make renders, I was completely ass at it. I was just awful. But as I kept using it, I got better at it. All it took was time and effort. It paid off greatly. Same goes for learning to edit, or to film, or to write a script. You can't rush any of these kind of skills. Rome wasn't built in a day. Give it a shot. The first time isn't going to be perfect. If you go into learning a new skill and thinking you'll get it right the first time around, you're setting yourself up for failure. Trust me on this. I had to fail so many times to get it right, and you should too. Don't be afraid to fail. It's better to try than to never try it at all. That's what I think anyways. I guess that leads us back to the question, is AI overhated or pure evil? When it comes down to it, AI is a threat. It could take away jobs, if we let it. But another thought to consider is that there's plenty of jobs that were made redundant due to unprecedented advancements in our society. Do I think AI is a part of that revolution? Well, not really. In order for AI to take everything over, it would need to be human, and you really can't teach it how to be something that it clearly is not. It's designed to decipher data, to make things asked of it, to give you nearly perfect results each time. Yes, it making mistakes are a human trait, but the mistakes don't feel human. What I mean by that is that with the way AI makes those mistakes, it's the kind that feels like misinterpretations rather than something that can realistically occur. No artist, for example, is going to add an extra finger to the character by accident, or draw up a background that's vaguely recognizable. Nobody does that on purpose, unless they're an AI. It's gonna get better in some ways, but I don't believe it's going to be entirely viable to create a whole-ass movie or drop a banger album that rivals the top artists of past and present. It may be better at some things than others, which is a huge concern, but let's be real, it isn't out to get us either. The problem that I see with AI right now is the people who actively use it for questionable intentions because they can't do it themselves. They don't possess any meaningful skills to achieve their goals, so they take the work of others and claim success that they didn't earn through hard work or dedication. These are the kind of people that should really be called out, much like many of these companies should be held accountable for it, because they feel the need to get involved in something that they don't really seem to understand to a T. People spend years honing their craft to do this, not just because they love it, but because it puts food on the table. How exactly is anyone with talent supposed to make a living if someone uses AI to fake it to make it? How does an artist compete with that? How is anyone supposed to compete with something that could pump out thing after thing nonstop? I just don't understand the thought process behind wanting to do that to people who worked hard to get where they are, and I think that's what I want you all to take away from this. AI can be pretty helpful, we've seen that. It can also do plenty of harm as well, but at the end of the day, it's up to how each person wants to use that AI. It's really hard to enforce what is and what isn't okay in a world where we don't really have any laws to fight against it, at least at the moment. It's such a new thing that we're currently dealing with, and it's going to take some time before anything meaningful passes that will benefit everyone involved. What can be done is to starve those who misuse AI for attention. Even if you're not giving them any money, interacting with someone that uses AI brings attention. So, the only way to stop it is to just stop giving it attention altogether. Find ways to prevent from taking things that we work hard on to be trained by an AI generator. I suppose it's all easier said than done, even wishful thinking on my part. I think people will always find ways to screw each other over no matter what. But what I'm getting at here is that I don't think AI is the problem. It seems to be more of an individual problem, that by letting anyone use these tools, which are unregulated to a fault, you end up with situations that can indeed cause harm. And until legally that harm can be addressed, the only thing we can do is our best.
And that's what I would have done with
That video all those years ago if I had faith in humanity. I will say though, this YouTube video generator sure came in clutch. Man, what was I thinking? AI was totally the death of our civilization. Only took less than 10 years for it to fall apart. And now we've got 30 Marvel movies being pumped out a year by Disney, Sony, Discovery, Paramount Bros. Pictures. And it looks like Breaking Bad is finally getting that 50th season. Didn't think that would get a continuation. Insane how much can change in over 1,000 years. All morals and ethics just completely thrown out the window. But hey, it isn't so bad. At least I've got myself a catgirl girlfriend from that successful AI-generated anime series. There is a 2D catgirl cutie in my life, and now it seems that AI has made it all possible. As a result, how I became a pet owner and husband all in one go. Now that one is a classic.
Yeah, CJ darling, dinner is ready. I made sure to put extra maple syrup on them, just the way you like it.
Oh, coming, honey. I was getting hungry writing up that prompt for this video. We're having Will Smith's famous spag balls for Dinnerfest. The maple syrup on them really adds to the flavor profile. Anyways, get the fuck out of here. Don't want those Tesla Cybertruck drones to strike this location.